Yay. So it's so good to have you here. I was so excited about your book.
That makes me
I'm
happy.
I am really interested in what we can do as ordinary folks to make a difference in this particular time. And so I really see the climate scientist piece as a way to get people involved and educated and participating. So I was excited to see that you're doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always a bit torn. I love citizen science, and I think it's an amazing tool. And there's so many different ways to engage in it. Um, so I think about that all the time of how to help people find the thing that's right for them.
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
that's the key is finding something that you really like so that you continue to do it.
Right.
You know, when
Right.
I first published my book and I was on a book tour across the country, or I would be talking to people who want to help, but I'm telling them to use iNaturalist, which we could talk about what that is. Maybe some of your listeners, I'm sure some of them already know, maybe others don't. But as you know, iNaturalist is a platform for people online. It's easier to sign up for it on a desktop or a laptop than it is on a phone. But
Yeah.
eventually, I mean, the most common way to use it is actually to put the app on your phone. And when you're out and about, to take a photograph using the app. So you open the app that you've signed on to, and you take a photograph with your phone. And then the app asks you, using the app, you can identify what you're seeing. So, like behind me here is echinacea, and this echinacea was in Arkansas. So when I took that picture, a naturalist could say exactly where I was in Arkansas when I saw those blossoms, what the date, time it was, and the latitude and longitude. So latitude and longitude are giving us our precise locations in space. So
Hmm.
we're putting together space and time and a species observation. And this is a very, very profound contribution each of us can make to understanding how nature works and what's happening to it under climate change pressures. So why that's important is we need to figure out if there's ways we can get ahead of helping some species as they struggle with climate change impacts. But I realize that telling people just to use iNaturalist sometimes isn't enough, because you have to have kind of a context in your own mind and your own life for why you're doing it. And a lot of really successful volunteer projects have community bases where you're going out with other people
Hmm.
and you're meeting them. And so it's kind of like, programs where you're accountable not only to yourself, but to other people. And that can really be helpful because you're going to really enjoy yourself with other people. And then you could talk about your experience and it can become bigger than just you, something that's more than just I'm doing something for nature, but I'm also really doing something with and for other people. Does that make sense?
It does, excuse me. Yeah, and it makes me wonder, um, because I've got a project going here in Spokane, I hope. And it's looking at the small water cycle and how residents can impact that. So we start with compost because if you compost your yard, your soil is healthy enough to start to hold water. And then you can augment to that compost with additional additions like biochar to actually grow your soil. Or you can go further by redesigning your land to hold water so that water has a space to sit before it goes down. And you can even plant like a mini forest where you're bringing back the original plants, animals, critters that wanted to be there. And they need all of that in order to survive too. But it creates a more robust and resilient space. And it increases the transfer evaporation process. So we're kind of looking at that. So can you give me a sense of how we could use iNaturalist to support that?
Well, I love what you're doing. So what's the group that are you doing it with a group of people?
Well, I'm trying to get the whole city engaged, actually.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, you're doing something that's really profound because you're engaging, I teach, so excuse me for I'll be a little professorial, but you're putting together the abiotic world of water and rocks, and then you're helping the cycle of making soil, and soil is kind of right an intermediary between the living and the non-living world. And the state of our earth today is such that humans are impacting the unliving world of rocks and water and atmosphere, hugely, profoundly. We're in a new era, a new epoch called the Anthropocene. And needs our tending, it needs our care, and you're applying your tenderness and your care. And then what you're doing is really supporting other species. So beginning with the soil, right? That. And you have all those little species that you can't even see that are going to come. If you build it, they will come. So I think, I live in San Francisco. I have kind of I don't know, I haven't really figured out what to do with my open space. I don't have very much, and I'm on bedrock here. So
Right, we are too.
there is some soil there, but it was put there, but it's not much. And so where I find a kind of peaceful negotiation with the space of, there's a lot of birds that come past here, as there are where you live. We're on the Pacific Flyway, and they need things to eat and they need water. So by you increasing the water, you are helping species go through. And so actually, one thing you could do is try to capture those species observations on iNaturalist. Now, birds are hard to photograph, as anybody knows. The people that love to photograph them use those big cameras. And a lot of people use eBird for bird observations.
Yeah,
And
I've used
eBird
Merlin. Yeah,
and Merlin gives you, so Merlin is a fabulous app you can put on your phone that helps you identify birds. It's so fun.
yeah,
And it's just fantastic. It's an incredible app. All these things are just so fun to use because, they bring the world around us to life and relationship, right? You think you're alone in your backyard space, but no, you're not. I observed this robin. I mean, it's not the same robin, but on this kind of deck, railing, a robin usually comes by in the spring, and that makes that his territory. And so I'm like, oh, are you, descended from last year's robin, or it's just a good spot for you guys? Anyway, I don't actually contribute to eBird because I don't feel confident enough of my bird identifications. And eBird, I'm going to, that's an aspiration of mine. I do use iNaturalist, so I can take a picture of that robin every year. It's not the same robin. And what I'm doing is creating data that over years can show really maybe a different time frame in which a robin appeared in my back deck. And that timing can give all kinds of information to managers of open space, of water resilience, of air quality, of, certainly of species health, to say, well, why, are they coming every year at the same time, or are we seeing them coming earlier and earlier, later and later? What other kind of patterns can we put next to that to compare? So for example, if we have a very big wildfire year here, that could absolutely impact whether when a robin comes, because of the air quality. And maybe those robins can't really hang out here because there's too much smoke in the air. So we start to see patterns, and that's the whole point of all of these apps, where you're making observations and contributing them to a database. Because with that database, your observations in Spokane and my observations in San Francisco can start to create a story. It's not like we're going to see the same robin, but if you're seeing them at some point and I'm seeing another, and then next year it's a little bit different, it's over time that we see patterns. It's like the difference between weather that's very variable every year and climate change, where we're looking at big weather changing patterns over big periods of time. But it's the adding up of all the little pieces of data that create the accuracy of the big picture of what's happening. So you're doing
Wonderful.
great things. So what I would say is actually any kind of species that are growing where you are, tending is really useful information. So you could, as things start to pop up from the soil in the spring, you could take pictures of them, put that on iNaturalist, because one of the things you're doing is documenting, here I'll be a professor again, phenology. And phenology is from the Greek meaning to show. Pheno means show.
Mhm.
So the phenology is the timing of nature's events, when things buds burst, flowers bloom, when flowers die, when leaves die and fall off of a tree or a plant, depending on where you live. Sometimes you just live around, plants that don't lose their leaves. But this is, again, how nature is responding to the cycles of life is very, very, that's the critical thing. And so you could just be photographing the same, little daisies coming up every year. But when they bloom, when they die each year, again, you are helping create that pattern of a picture of what's happening. So it's always more than just you. It's you participating in the big picture. And I find that to be really satisfying and really inspiring, because each of us is, bounded by our own limitations, whatever they are, and we're all limited by, a lifespan. And we feel, at odds sometimes with our own existence, right? Like, why am I, how am I related to the rest of this life?
Right.
But, that is something that is an active question. There's no one answer to that. The response is develop a relationship with that outside world, and it will start to teach you things. And also you'll start to feel your place in it. And that's
Mm.
very satisfying.
I like that, feeling your place in it. I think that's something that we're really missing. What prompted you to write the book that you did? Because you did a whole lot of research. I mean, I'm really impressed. I'm seeing people pop up there that I would not have anticipated. So that was kind of fun.
I think that it's both a strength and a weakness of mine as a writer to, well, I feel compelled to research things very, very thoroughly. And I see a lot of connections.
Yeah.
So I want to one thing as a writer in general that I try to do is to try to bring in unexpected connections for the reader.
No,
And
you
that
certainly do
is,
that. Yeah.
I want, and I partly do it just because that's pleasurable. It's fun, right? When you're reading something, oh, that's a fun juxtaposition. But another part of that is really when you're a writer about nature, one of the things you're really trying to convey is that everything is connected. And everything is really connected. So I think that it's also a weakness of mine because I can put too many things in. And when I wrote that book, I was motivated to write a book about citizen science based on the book that I wrote before that, which is called The Spine of the Continent, Racing to Save America's Last Best Wilderness. And that book, I loved writing it. It was really an adventure. The spine of the continent is the Rockies from like Canada all the way down through the lower 48 states. So that's not Hawaii and Alaska, but all the others. And then going down through Mexico. And really that mountain range continues into the Andes, but it's the Rocky Mountains. And the book was about the birth of conservation biology as a science, but it's a science that is really trying to bridge other things, a mission-driven science. It's almost like a religion of science in
Mm.
a way, trying to really put together what science can tell us in a quantitative or number-based measurable way, which is extremely necessary for accurately understanding what's happening. And then really the feeling, the passion, the connection, as you just mentioned, to place and the call of responsibility we all have now to save nature because it's in terrible straits. So the spine of the continent, I went all up and down the spine of the continent and had these adventures. But I also sort of came up against this terrible realization that as much as there's so many wonderful people working hard to save nature, there's not enough of them. And there's just a great drive toward development in
Mm.
our world. It's not going to stop, by the way. We can't really stop it, I don't think. I mean, this is another environmental writer might argue with me, and I would be happy to have that discussion. But I don't think we're going to stop it. So I think we need to figure out how to do it mindfully so that we also increase the ability of other species to coexist with us. And there's many, many, many ways to do that. One of the reasons I teach, so here I'm taking a tangent because everything's connected, but I'll come back to the book. I teach at the California College of the Arts as one
Mm.
of the places I teach. And one of the reasons I do that, I teach to design graduate students
Mm.
because they make things. Their vision, they see visions of making things differently, and then they physically make them. And I wanted those kids to know nature is the ultimate maker. Nature is the ultimate inventor. And if you understand how nature works, this will help you with your own work. And then, I mean, honestly, I try to take them on field trips as much as possible. Just get them
Sounds
outside.
like biomimicry.
Well, there's biomimicry for sure. Yeah, biomimicry. Yeah, there's a lot to learn. But what I really like about the design space, Kathryn, is when we think about developing of using nature with, so creating as you're doing in your yard, you're helping to create a space that where the water can move through more productively.
Right.
So think about how we've moved water through the system. We make
Yeah.
dams, we
Yeah.
divert it, we make canals, we get it to move as fast as possible through space so that we can use it for our own reasons. But there's other ways to direct water so that we can use some of it more quickly, but also where we can take those dams down, let beavers make dams where they want to, increase nature while we also increase our use of.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
anyway, I'm thinking practically all the time, like, what can we do? So when I wrote The Spine of the Continent, I thought there's not enough people. So I hear two things on the spine of the continent. One is there's not enough people to save nature. I could see that myself. Two, there's not enough data to know exactly how to save nature in specific places.
Mm.
And then I went on one of the trips I reported on was to learn how to track wildlife, especially jaguar in Mexico and Arizona. So jaguar have been coming back up through from Mexico into Arizona and New Mexico, and they're on the endangered species list, which enjoins those states and the federal government to create critical habitat for them. But there's a lot of mountain ranges down there, which I also recommend if people have never gone to see the Sky Islands, an extraordinary part of our country. Just
Mm.
incredibly beautiful mountain ranges and unlike any other I've ever been in. But I haven't been to ones, in Asia. But just so beautiful. So the jaguar could live in a lot of those mountain ranges. So which one should we try to protect for them? Well, where are the jaguar going? They know what they need. So we track them, figure out where they're going, and then listen to the jaguar. Oh, this part of the Chiricahua Mountains should be protected because that's where you want to live. And when I was training to learn how to track big cats, I was in Mexico with a whole bunch of different people from Tucson, and they were all different kinds of people. There was a retired prison guard, super conservative. There was a man about my age who had been in jail for being an activist. He had strapped himself to a bulldozer to try to prevent development. So he was thrown in jail. I mean, these were on opposite sides of the political spectrum. There were also very different racial characteristics of people coming from really different places in the world. Nobody discussed politics. Nobody asked anything that was going to be divisive between them. They all were like, what did you see today? Look what I saw. Is this a jaguar? Is this a mountain lion track? Or is this a coyote track? Oh, we went out and we saw these birds this morning, or we went out and we saw this big bull that got free from, so we talked about what we were doing. And then one of the people on that trip, who was a young man, I mean, he's not that young, he's in his 40s probably. He was dressed from head to toe in camouflage. He had one of those gigantic cameras that had like a camouflage decoration on it. The guy was like looking like a commando, right? This was his little thing. And that guy got up at 4 o'clock every morning and went out and took pictures of birds. And he said he grew up in a hunting family and he loved everything about hunting except the killing of animals. So he decided to photograph them. A few years later, that guy found jaguar tracks near Tucson. Not for anybody to worry about any it's not that close to Tucson. And he was the one whose work was used to help create critical habitat for jaguar. So this was, years of him looking every 2 weeks, going and looking for tracks, taking pictures, and then he found it. And then he has done something, contributed a piece of information that is helping a species to survive. I mean, I kind of want to cry when I think about that. And then I thought, oh, that project was called Citizen Tracker.
Mm.
And I'm like, oh, it's citizen science. We get the data from people because there's so many of us. And we are able to use our data to make real change. So we get the data for the scientists and the managers, and we also get the people involved from all walks of life. So I'm like, I got to write a book about citizen science. And that was my motivation. But then when I wrote it, and this happened to me when I was writing The Spine of the Continent, I just was overwhelmed with the realization that our degradation of nature has a historical timeline. It's all about history. In The Spine of the Continent, I realized we wiped out beaver from coast to coast in pursuit of manifest destiny. So it was literally the making of the United States that is based on beaver fur, and it actually really is.
Yeah.
And then with the citizen science book, I didn't want to do the whole country. So I focused a lot on California. As you know, thank you for reading it. There's many other places that are referenced. But the chronological story that can be told in California is a little microcosm of what happened in the whole country. But what happened here happened very fast. What happened across the country took 300 years from when the Pilgrims came and interacted with the native people. For many hundreds of years, native people in the United States were big actors in the economy. They ruled the fur trade from time to time, and it was really in the 1800s that the very violent treatment of native people was really spiked and then did not stop. That was really the death knell of a certain time, again in service of the United States of America. So in California, we put that moment in 1769. That's a lot later, when Portola, the Spanish for the Spanish crown, made first contact with native people here in California and immediately enslaved native Californians. And what's really interesting, and that story really drove how I structured the whole book, because today we have these wildfires, right? We have these out of control wildfires.
Right.
And a lot of why we have them is because the indigenous practices of ceremonial burning were interrupted in 1769. So the burning that was regular on the landscape and that helped to sustain the health of the landscape was stopped. And we are in a pickle today partly because of that.
Yes.
So that was just like, okay, that's the beginning of the end in California right there.
Mhm.
And then, of course, as you know, because you read my book, thank you for that. The story of the Amamutsun people and bringing back ceremonial burning, bringing back plants that are sacred and important to the Amamutsun people. It's just a huge revelation. It's so hopeful. It's healing, and it's necessary. And I don't know if you are up on 30 by 30. Have you heard of 30 by 30,
Oh,
Kathryn?
I don't.
Well, 30 by 30 is a global initiative of the UN to protect 30% of ecosystems by 2030.
Okay.
Like 167 or so countries, sovereign nations have signed onto it. So have some so-called subnationals. So a subnational is like an official entity, but not a nation,
Mm,
including the state of California. The
mm.
state of California is now leading way ahead of everybody else in 30 by 30. So Governor Gavin Newsom signed legislation, I think in 2020, might have been 2022. I'm going to forget, but legislating that we would protect 30% of California ecosystems by 2030 and allocating more than $1 billion to doing it.
Mm.
So that has been an incredible change in conservation here in California. A big focus on indigenous cultures here and where tribal people can apply for grants. There have been a lot of grants to tribal people, but they, of course, have to show that the plans they have for the funding will provide durable protection for into perpetuity. And so it's really this whole full circle that is happening now in California, and very, very positive. Anyway, that's kind
It
of how I
sounds
see it.
wonderful. Yeah, that sounds like a perfect spot to do mini forests, actually. That
To
tech
do what?
mini forests, that technique would be really applicable there. It's so fast, it allows you to regrow a forest in about 3 years. It becomes self-sustaining. You plant the whole forest at once, all the
Wow.
plants that need to happen. So all the stories are there and it's tight. And so it's very resilient because they already have the agreements to be together. So they don't have to do that. They just have to make it happen. So it's been used all over the world in many different environments.
I'll have to
And
educate myself more about that. I know that in California we really have too many forests right now. We have too many trees. Um, but I don't know how that the whole thing relates to what species of tree, what
yeah,
location.
there's a difference between planting trees and planting forest. That's really the difference. We planted trees for a long time and we have plantations everywhere, but they're not forests and they're not very sustainable because they need the other plants to really support that network. So it's a smaller, weaker version. It's not that trees aren't great, but they really need forests. They need their neighbors. It's not trees aren't designed to live by themselves. They're designed to live in community, which is what an ecology is. Yeah.
That's really great.
Yeah. So Hannah Lewis has a book called Mini Forest Revolution. So I
Okay,
highly
I will get
recommend
that.
it
Mini
because
forest
it's kind of
revolution.
a, yeah, it's kind of step by step how to understand and do it wherever you are. And there's just great stories about it, just really great stories. Um, what are you hoping? I mean, I'm kind of hearing this in what you're saying, but I want to make it really explicit. What are you hoping to have sort of as the consequence of your book? What are you hoping to have that book achieve? Because it feels like it's got a purpose. It's not just a fun educational thing to read.
Well, thank you for asking. I mean, this is again to kind of, there's a complexity to my book that was not necessarily called for. Because citizen science could be explained in a handbook, really, right? Like here's how
Yeah.
to do it. Let's look at the major platforms you can participate in. iNaturalist, Nature's Notebook you referenced. There's something called Zooniverse, if you want to do something completely online, where you're
Mm.
basically helping to ID animals in photographs usually. And that's super useful. We still need the human eye and the human judgment to recognize certain things that even AI doesn't get right. We're actually training AI to help us, but we need to train AI on identified photographs that people have verified. So you can really help model or create this model of the world through our powers of observation. But then at the same time, I wanted to have the complexity of history in here
Yeah.
because we have to grapple with that, right? Like, what are we doing here, people? What are we after? Are we going to just keep building up until the whole thing collapses? Because that's where we're heading. And we have to stop and think about that. And I think it is helpful to think about why we got to where we are. Um, these reckonings that we're doing as a general society, reckonings with indigenous people in North America, reckonings with all kinds of what we call colonialism, and all kinds of purposing of the energies of other bodies for the uses of the few. This is something we have to really grapple with. I'm waiting for people to really get around, like, is it ethical for us to, it's not ethical for us to drive species to extinction because we are using up their resources. We're using up their habitat. I mean, we're stealing their life from them. It's
Yes.
one thing. Now, I will make, I eat meat. I eat only organic meat, and I only eat it, grass fed. I have a friend who has a grass fed ranch, so I really try to support him. Um, but I do think that eating and harvesting nature is part of its cycle. This is one of the things that we learned from
Yes.
native
Yes.
people, right? Like harvesting and pruning helps the cycle of growth if you do it mindfully and within a rhythm that is also cognizant of continuing the life of that species that you still really want to bring back another population of them in a couple of years or next year, depending on what it is. So I think we need to ask ourselves, what are we doing here in terms of how we frame our own life aspirations? And then as you know, I told a story about my father's death in this book because for my father, really, he was a writer. He was certainly not an unproblematic person, but he was a very positive force overall. And he was a writer, and he loved nature. So to me, the love that I have for my father and the experience of him dying really became very entwined with my love for nature and how nature comes back. There's a
Mm.
cycle of life that we are part of. It's okay to die. I mean, I'm saying that at age almost 60, well, I'm 64. I don't want people to die out of the natural order of things, although some people do. But like an old person, it's okay. It's okay. And then a dimension of art, and because one of the major stories in the book is the sea star wasting off the coast of North America, and that story brought me right to Ed Ricketts, who is the good friend of John Steinbeck, and Ricketts was the model for Doc in Cannery Row. And it turns out, like crazily, that Joseph Campbell, who was the world mythologizer and kind of one of the first self-help gurus, really, spent a year with Steinbeck and Ricketts. And specimens that Ricketts and Campbell collected off the coast of Alaska are used today to try to help understand the sea star wasting syndrome. So
Wow.
this is, again, that's like almost 100 years ago, specimens they collected. And Campbell, who's the hero of A Thousand Faces, and he's the inspiration for Star Wars, for all of the Marvel comics. The whole idea of the heroic journey is brought to us, thank you, Joseph Campbell. I mean, there's problems with him too. But but that brought it to, there's been a lot of literature and art has intersected with understanding nature and humans in a very deep way. So I'm trying to we get this world where we have science on the right and we have literature on the left, or the other way around. And I have a craving for those to be more integrated. So that was something that was really keen for me to approach in that book.
Yeah, you certainly did. It's very wonderful to see the interweavings and to feel the excitement that you get out of that, the joy that it gives you to
That's
make
nice. Thank you.
connections. Yeah, yeah, it was very rich. Excuse me.
Um, God bless you, or
Yeah, I got something. I don't know what it is, but it's um would you talk a little bit about Nature's Notebook?
thank you. I love Nature's Notebook. So Nature's Notebook is not that easy. I don't think it is. I spent some time with a K through 8 school that was very keenly focused on environmental sustainability and teaching the kids hands-on learning, and on a beautiful campus with 35 acres of California,
Oh,
various kinds of California, ecosystems, chaparral, maritime, coastal, oak forests. I mean, just really beautiful nature there. So we tried to set up a Nature's Notebook transect for the kids to monitor some of the species there. So basically, Nature's Notebook is it's a platform that is associated with I'm going to forget, but one of the government agencies. Ultimately it's either the Department of the Interior or the Department of Agriculture, but it's part of this national phenology network. Now, a national phenology network is a really important thing. Think about weather. Weather stations are the first citizen science
mhm.
thing, like in this country. And even today, the weather report you see, yeah, you're getting a lot of data from satellites, but you are also getting the really perhaps more useful information from thousands of weather stations all over the country that are where regular people like you and me go out every day and they read those readings on their weather station and they send it into the government. So it's really and think about how important that was to nation making, because you have to know what's the weather in different parts of the country to know what could be grown there. You have
Mhm.
to know what kind of settlements are appropriate there. If you're going to, really go and establish market economies, you have to know what the weather is there, right? You just do. And we all live by the weather. So thinking about the weather is the first part of phenology, because weather, is seasonally timed by and large. And so what you do with Nature's Notebook is you develop a transect. A transect is simply an area of anything outside. Like the ones that I was trying with this K through 8 school were really actually just a few trees. So the transect that's kind of deceptive, because it was really just a few trees that we were focused on. At another place out here in California, the Pepperwood Preserve, they've been doing Nature's Notebook for years there, and years and years. And so they have transects where they use their GPS and they go to exactly to a certain point, and then they have their GPS that tells like how long the transect is, and then they measure and mark what's happening to the plants in that piece of land on a given day. And I believe they go out every 2 weeks. So what they're doing is what I referenced before with iNaturalist that you could infer, which is what is blooming, what is fruiting, what is dying, what kind of insects are on the plants, what's the state of the insect? Is there a caterpillar chrysalis, or is there an active caterpillar eating something? Is there a gall on it? When do the leaves fall off? So every 2 weeks, they're noting on the same plants in the same transect. And then that data there's one great thing about Nature's Notebook for teachers. There is a very deep bench of curriculum and help
Mhm.
in the website. like if you are interested in doing this, if you're a teacher or just, you know, a community leader wants to do, like, let's do a nature's notebook study of a piece of a park. You could be very, very helped by what's on the website. And also, they're very nice people. You can email them. I
Okay.
emailed them quite a bit. Ultimately, it was the partly it's because in California, the trees that we selected, like an oak tree in California, can look the same every day, like almost all year. And then it
Mhm.
suddenly can be completely different. Like suddenly it's blooming with new leaves. Suddenly, oh, there you notice the acorns. But for kids, that was hard. Um, so if you're, it depends what you're trying to do. You know, grasses, flowers, shrubs. These could be maybe more satisfying to depending on the group that you're dealing with. Um, but this is a really wonderful, it's, so iNaturalist is purely getting the data, and you don't have to participate in doing anything past that. You can. And one of the things you find on iNaturalist is you can make friends through iNaturalist. I know many people who go out hunting for, you know, mushrooms together. Like right now, this is February. It's starting to be spring here in San Francisco. So they're going to go out together and look for, well, where are the first wildflowers out? Yes, they are. What are the first blooms of some trees that are blossoming already? In general, with all of these apps, they prefer native plants, wild plants, as opposed to planted and tended by human plants.
Right.
That said, tomorrow I'm taking my class to the San Francisco Botanical Garden to do iNaturalist and other things. And it's fine to do that. The Botanical Garden is interested in when their plants are blooming differently from year to year as well, what
Mhm.
plants are doing well, what plants people are drawn to. I mean, it's a lot of good information. So Nature's Notebook is a little bit more seriously structured. So it takes a bit more effort to participate. On the
Okay.
other hand, of course, it has that satisfaction of participating.
So one of the questions that's running through my mind, I'm going to tie it to two things. We're seeing so many changes happening through climate. I mean, just the weather is not what it used to be. Snowfall's not what it used to be. It's hotter than it used to be. And one of the things that I know I've learned about evolution and plants and animals is that they sort of co-evolve together. So there's a timing thing where the insect knows that there's going to be a plant blooming at this time, so it makes sure to have kids in time to eat whatever is on that plant. And now that's all getting messed up. So can you talk about how these tools might help us understand and deal with these issues? Are there things that we can do about that, or is that kind of going to be a mess all by itself?
It is a mess all by itself. Species, um, you're right. Like the horse is out of the starting gate. We're never going back to normal
Right.
Holocene conditions. You know, the era, the epoch in which we're both born, is over. We're in the Anthropocene, and the chemical feedbacks, the the temperatures, precipitation patterns are never going back. Now, yes, evolution is about adaptation. So you're going to find adaptation by species to these changes. If they had enough space to do it, they could do it. Some of them will die, some of them will go extinct. Others will become stronger and more dominant because they will adapt better.
Mhm.
But here's the thing that really is how we are really hammering the nail in the coffin. We're destroying their habitat.
Mhm.
So it's not just climate change, it's habitat destruction. So when they don't have space to take time, they don't have a chance.
The
So,
checkered butterfly.
pardon?
The checkered butterfly.
Yes. So bay checker spot butterfly is a good story, or not a good story, but this is a subspecies of the checker spot family. There's a lot of subspecies. This particular butterfly was very locally focused in the Santa Cruz or San Mateo County, and Paul Ehrlich, who's a famous scientist, and Peter Raven, who's a famous botanist, were both training their minds on what was happening with bay checker spots at Jasper Ridge Biological Preserve, which is Stanford University's biological reserve. And there's upwards of 70 experiments going on in that very, like 1,300 acres at any given time. And some of the most important climate change research has come from right that spot. And how we know about global ecology has come from that spot. Global ecology is really about how everything is connected. So there are these scientists studying this butterfly, and it starts to go extinct right there. And they're like, what's happening? Like, we're protecting this place. What's going wrong? And eventually they really figured out that what was going wrong was elsewhere, like nearby, the town of Woodside, which today is just an absolute enclave of wealth, was being developed. And as it was being developed, habitat for bay checker spots right there was being wiped out. So any population of a species needs other populations. And it makes sense, right? You need
Right.
to you need to have some interchange between different populations so that you don't become genetically inbred. So these
Right.
species need to be able to move back and forth with each other to other populations. And different species have different population needs. Some of them, like, the passenger pigeon and the Carolina parakeet, both of which are extinct. People didn't think they would ever go extinct because there were millions of them at a time. So they thought you could shoot as many as you want. There's going to be a million more, until they collapsed, until they were gone, because they were population dependent on having that many of themselves. That's how they lived. And so there was like a point at which they couldn't do their evolutionary thing anymore. And so
Mm.
they collapsed. And then this is with the bay checker spot butterfly. They needed to be able to get very closely, to have other populations of their own kind pretty close. Now, other species of butterfly can fly much farther than that butterfly. So, monarchs can fly very far. I mean, even the ones that don't fly that far are flying far. And there's many other species that traverse a lot of distance, and they aren't as hemmed in by close by populations. They can get to other populations. But again, we're making those worlds harder for them to get from one to the other. We're putting so many things in between that they're getting interrupted. Like, they can't make it through a city, they can't
Right.
make it over a dam, and so we're transforming the earth. This is a thing about 30 by 30, which some of your listeners will be saying, well, why 30%? Is that enough? If we
Mm.
have 30% of biodiversity, is that enough space and time for species? And the answer is actually no. We're going to have to do better than that.
Yeah.
But we're starting where we can all kind of put our minds around it and measure it. So the 30 number is important because we can measure it, and it's not as frightening to people as saying, oh, we need 50%. Because people start to get very territorial. Are you going to take my property? Are you going to,
Right.
we have that political divide, right, in our country, where people don't think nature should deserve anything. It should all be people who can afford to buy it. And that's ecologically ignorant, because you can be as rich is not going to save you when
Right.
there's no species diversity.
Yep. Yeah. No. With if our world collapses, then money's not going to matter. It's not going to be sufficient. Yeah. See, what's your favorite story of all the stories that you uncovered when you were doing this?
Well, I
What?
have two obsessions, I think. One is the Amamusin story about the California indigenous practices. I mean, that one really changed how I view the world. I had to stop and restructure the whole book, right? Like, wow,
So
this
say
is
for
it.
the listener, tell the story a little bit so they know what you're talking about.
So thank you. Well, I got to this story because one of the categories of citizen science is called co-creation. And that's where you have a PhD scientist who doesn't just kind of come up with, this is my study subject, this is my plan, I'm going to go do it in an environment, but says to a people who are in an environment that that scientist is interested in, I have this study subject that I would like to pursue, and it's your land. Would you like to, I would like your permission to do this as equals. Is there a question you would like to ask, or is there something I can do for you while I am doing this? And this comes actually out of anthropology. So anthropologists were, the ones in the early 1900s going around the world, Margaret Mead going to Samoa, coming back and saying, look how these people live. And learning about what human culture is generally based on other places and other traditions. And one of the things about anthropology in general is that, they're pretty much of a saying that all cultures are equal. Like there's no such thing as a better culture than another. There's no such thing as a better race than another at all. Like, and they're showing the data for that. So they're operating within a culture where the dominant culture, especially going, back to the early 1900s, the dominant culture is, well, some people are better than others, and we are the better ones. And we can go take from other places and tell the stories of other people, and that will be like interesting to us. So anthropology had this realization that when they were going to Samoa or to some other place and talking to tribal people, they were actually being colonialists themselves. They were taking knowledge from other people, bringing it back home and making their own personal careers off of that information. And this actually occasioned a big nervous breakdown within the whole field. And the whole field is like, we cannot do things this way. We cannot do this. And actually the diversity, equity, and inclusion sort of juggernaut that we have today, which has many tributaries, this is a major tributary going far back to this is not fair. We can't do this the same way. So in the field of anthropology, archaeology is a sub part of anthropology. It was developed to do this co-creation of projects. So in my book, I'm like, I need a co-creation project because I need to understand that about citizen science. So where am I going to find one? And that led me to this work of Kent Lightfoot at Berkeley, an archaeologist who worked collaboratively with the Amamutsan people. So that's a tribal band in the Santa Cruz Mountains here, who to excavate what's called the Big House. The tribal word is Quirosti, and this was uncovered. This is a place in the Santa Cruz Mountains that a California state archaeologist, Mark Hilkema, found. And they determined that it was the meeting place where Portola made first contact, that's the phrase, with Native people in California. And he was hosted there. He was given food and
Mm.
shelter and supplies. The Native people were extremely kind to Portola. In retrospect, too kind to Portola. And so I saw, and so then Kent Lightfoot, though, is doing an analysis of showing with data how long have Native Californians been burning the landscape? Because you can have storytelling.
Right.
This is a story of our culture that we always burned, but we can't go on stories. We have to go on data. We have to go on proof. And proof is data that can be analyzed over and over again. Equations that can be run over and over again. You have to be able to replicate your findings. And And so that's what Kent Lightfoot did with the Amamutsan people and with other tribal members from different tribal affiliations in California who helped with this big project. So that was huge. And then the other favorite story of mine, I love because it's really my creation story that I grew up with, the Garden of Eden. And I write in my Citizen Scientist book about the development of natural history museums and of the Western scientific tradition comes out of religion. It comes out of the Judeo-Christian tradition. And there's different ways you could tell the story, but in a way, it all starts with the Garden of Eden. So
Mhm.
really, literally, this is when Darwin said that life forms come about through adaptations in new generations based on reproduction. He didn't know about genetics, but he inferred that there was, intrinsic materials being recombined in the next generation that would create progeny that would be better adapted to new conditions.
Mhm.
This is how new life forms come into being. That's what Darwin's whole thing was. This was absolute heresy. This is 1859 that was published. So in 1859, that's not that long ago, absolutely accepted by most people, including very educated people, that life forms came into being by divine fiat, that God created them in one instant or in 7 days, according to the Bible. So we have the story of the Garden of Eden, and we all know what happened, right? Eve ruined it all, and the garden was dispersed and it was gone. And then people, developed on the land of earth and then became even more sinful than Eve till God said to Noah, people are so sinful, I'm going to send a big flood to kill them all. But you're a good man. So I want you to take your family and a reproductive pair, basically a male and a female of every species on earth, build an ark, get on it, and wait for the floods. I'll give you the sign when it's safe to make land. So this was really believed to be true, that this is how the earth came to be, and that where species are on the earth, where we find them, is because they walked there basically from where Noah's Ark landed. And then some scientists, that we wouldn't even call them scientists, some thinkers started to think, how could a frog that needs to be wet make it from Mount Ararat in Turkey, which is literally where everybody thought the ark had landed? How could that frog make it to South America? How could these species go across landscapes that would kill them? And these questions started to instigate the field of biogeography. And the Alfred Russel Wallace, who famously also came up with the theory of evolution by way of natural selection at the same time Darwin did, he's like the progenitor of the theory of of biogeography. And he made a biogeographical map of different regions where there were different kinds of species that's still pretty much in use today. So I love the story of the Garden of Eden because it was also thought, I'm a big fan of botanical gardens. It was also thought by some scholastic scholars and monks that the Garden of Eden must be hidden somewhere on the earth, that it got sort of tucked away somewhere. God just put it
Right.
away,
Right.
and that it could be found. So the age of exploration starts with these big ships going out from Europe, from the Dutch and the French and the Spanish, and they're looking like partly for that Garden of Eden. And they're finding pieces of Eden, right? They're finding incredible things. South America, Southeast Asia, all of these exotic places, things they've never seen before. And then they had another idea that maybe the Garden of Eden got dispersed all over the globe. It got broken up, so there were little pieces of it everywhere. So then the monks decided, let's collect all of the pieces and create these mini Garden of Edens, botanical gardens. And the other really deep instigation of botanical gardens was for medicinal purposes. So just
Right.
think of the healing properties of these plants. It was believed for a long time, even when people kind of started to really accept Darwin, that plants were an exception, that they didn't have any sexual reproduction. that it's why women were allowed to be involved with plants, because women were just like, it was too raw for them to understand animals because they have sexual reproduction, but they could understand plants because plants were just made from the mind of God and came about when God put them back down. So I just love that Garden of Eden because it's a naive story, but it still expresses a hope for unity.
Mm.
It expresses a relationship between a divine force and a physical reality. It's missing so many things that need it to be fulfilled, like predation.
Mm.
Like, also, can we talk about what would the lion do to the lamb on the ark? That's life. That's
Yeah.
life.
Right.
So and gardens, I think the Garden of Eden is like theologically in a way this sort of space that is transcends time, and yet it is part of time. So it
Mm.
is really a wonderful religious paradigm that also I think has the seeds of a more literal physical paradigm of actual life on Earth, which I think we need to worship a lot more. Um,
Yeah, I have my own story on the Garden of Eden.
oh, good. What?
I had because it's been in my mind for a long time too. There's got to be some real importance to the story that really we need to have, or it wouldn't have hung on. There's something there that pulls people. And the thought I had that really suddenly made it all make sense is that what the knowledge was that we metastasized was that we don't have to worry about other people. We could just worry about us. It was that first separation, which put us literally out of the garden, very literally. So we stepped out of nature at that point in time and decided we were just going to live our life. And that for me makes so much sense when I think about that story, that that's really what it was trying to encapsulate was that,
I like that so much, Catherine. What you're reminding me of too is from learning from my Catholic upbringing that sin is a separation from God,
yeah,
and sin is a lack.
yeah,
So there was Eve sinned, so she created the separation from God, and now living in a world without God in the same relationship. So again, we can think of and the native Californians and other native people considered burning and pruning and coppicing plants a covenant, a sacrament. I mean, a
that's
covenant
right. They
is a
stayed in the
sacrament.
garden. They quite literally stayed in the garden and took care of it.
They stayed in the garden and they're part of the garden, right? They
Yep,
are part of the garden.
yep, yep,
Yeah, it's amazing.
yeah. Well, I have totally enjoyed this. This has been great fun.
Me too. Thank you. And thank you for being a wonderful, doing a wonderful thing out there. Many wonderful things, but I think it's really communicating all this is so important. And I really
Yeah.
appreciate the effort that you make to do that.
Well,
And
and you,
really fun to talk.
it is. It's been a delight. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to do this. Very
It's
appreciative.
totally my pleasure. And I look forward to more future
Yes, yes.
developments, mini
Yeah.
forests.
Is there anything that you would haven't said you'd want to say?
I think that when I feel like citizen science is really, it's a great direction. I feel like it's ripe for people to invent it kind of in their own way. I don't mean invent your own database. Never do that. Always use something that somebody else is monitoring and collecting, because the data has to all be collected in a very specific way to be useful.
Right.
But especially school teachers, community leaders, all kinds of different kinds of activities. I think people in, you know, uh, assisted living facilities. I mean, just places where people have time and um, can observe. I mean, my mother was in an assisted, well, I remember this rehab facility she was in when she had fallen at a certain point. It had the most amazing courtyard. And oh, I got a lot of butterflies in that courtyard. I just thought, bring everybody out every day to this courtyard with their, and it doesn't have to be a smartphone. You can make a note, and have somebody else put the data on the database. But just to experiment with finding a relationship with nature somehow. And it doesn't have to be making these observations. I think it would be really great for people to do as you're doing with the water work. Also, pesticides and herbicides, we need
Yeah.
to really regulate those way more than they are. And they're
Yep.
killing the pollinators. That's very clear. So why should I be able to walk into a Home Depot right now and get a huge gallon, jug of Roundup? I mean, sometimes you need Roundup. That's okay, but not for like your whole yard. We need
Right.
to educate people about how to have a better yard. Thank you, Doug Tallamy, by the way. And you're doing the same thing. I mean, think of the
Yeah.
productivity of your space. I mean, how good does that feel? That's awesome.
Yep. Yep. And we're starting with compost.
Compost is a good thing.
It is.
It is a great thing.
Thank you, Mary Ellen, so much.
Thank you, Kathryn. Ciao.
Very
Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye bye.